Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Edge Report. It's Chris. Today, I've got an awesome guest in Rob Howard. Rob is a man of many hats and has become a pretty good friend here over the last couple of years. So, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. So, Rob, why don't you tell the world kind of your what I see as 3 or 4 hats that you wear professionally, of course. We can go into you as a dad later.
Yeah. So, I guess first and foremost, I think of myself as a builder by trade, Rob the builder, I guess. So I've been a licensed general contractor since 2004, so 20 years now. And I really have a heart for affordable housing. Most of my construction career was spent with Habitat for Humanity. So timely in the recent passing of President Carter. So quite the Habitat legacy there.
Yes.
I'm nowhere close to that, but I did spend 15 years with that organization, about 10 years with my local affiliate in Hickory, the Catawba Valley affiliate, and then 5 years with Habitat International as a sustainable building specialist. You and I use this term a lot now, and, I think of myself as a builder and developer of sustainable, attainable housing. That's really my passion in life. But everything I do is with a building science focus. So I have a master's degree in building science from Appalachian State University in Boone. And as you know, I also serve as a lecturer there in building science. So I've got one foot in the classroom and one foot in the field. And I think those things complement each other really well.
Yeah, they do. And that's why I continue to love our conversations, right? As an entrepreneur and a person who likes to explore what's next, I look at that whole equation and I think, man, how cool is this? Like, we're on the edge of something that's new and innovative and, affordable housing in the model that we know as we know it now. If we take the politics away from it, is not working, right? Some of the multifamily stuff that I've seen in commercial real estate is just really flimsy. That's not working. There's a lot of people making a lot of money that would say that those are successful projects, but then there's the operating expense that doesn't get equated into the CapEx first, the GPLP agreement and the rate of return. Then you've got the operating expense associated with maintaining that building, right? So attainable, sustainable, maintainable is sort of my new thing. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, how is that changing?
Yeah, good question. So I like to think of it in terms of total cost of ownership. And we talked about this stuff at Habitat, for decades really. But we're, it's not just affordable to buy, it's affordable to own and operate. And if you're a traditional for-profit developer or builder, you're not necessarily thinking about the person who's going to, occupy that house for the next 5 to 50 years and what their ongoing operational expenses are going to be like. So we get so caught up in first cost. Can they afford to buy it? Maybe. But maybe more importantly, can they afford to own it, to continue to live there and successfully? What we don't want to do is put people in a situation where they're quote unquote house poor. So traditionally we would say that you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your income on housing expenses. And from most Americans now, it's closer to 50%. So you could say that a lot of us are really house poor at this point. We're putting too much of our resources into shelter, and of course it's important, but there are a lot of other things, that are just as important. So we're out of balance.
Yeah, I love that. So part of what I'm trying to work on, as you know, with Pathways Communities is rebalancing the balance sheet. That's what I call it. Because you're right. My research is 25% of your gross income should go to rent and housing expenses. The median house right now is $425,000 in America. And the median income is about 60 grand. So they don't equate. There is no place at 5.5% interest with 20% down with responsible financing that those two worlds come together anymore. And let's talk about this a little bit since we talk about the total cost of ownership, right? Your lecturing side and your education side, some of that passion, we're seeing a massive deficit in people entering the trades, right? You and I were together at Catawba Valley Community College. How are the trades going that are supposed to support all of this ongoing maintenance for all of these capital real estate assets that we have?
Yeah, that is also going in the wrong direction. I mean, a lot of our, I guess industry knowledge and experience is aging out. I mean, I've got a lot of gray hair on my head, so who knows how many years I got left, but I mean, I guess as I age, I'm feeling a greater sense of urgency, to make as much impact as I can in the useful years I have left on Earth. But I mean, yeah, my sub base, my trade partners have aged as I have, and some of them are now retiring. And you know, a lot of construction businesses historically they've they've had their kids, in the business, and maybe they've handed that down to them when they retire. But I think to a great extent that's not happening at the level that it used to. So yeah, I'm concerned about the future of craftsmanship in our industry. And a lot of times when we say that, we're talking specifically about framing and carpentry kinds of activities. And that is, maybe that's the best example, but it's certainly not the only example. But whether you're building a shed or you're building a university, I mean, construction is a complicated process, and that's why we're called general contractors. You have to know a little bit about a lot of things, but you're not necessarily a specialist in anything. But you're so dependent upon people who are specialists in their trade. And a lot of times when we talk about skilled trades, we think of MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And I'm actually, at least for me in Western North Carolina, I feel like I'm in a pretty good place with those areas. But I mean, there's a lot of other things like drywall, painters, um, you know, concrete work. I mean, there's so many different aspects to this, and there's very few companies that wear those multiple hats like we're talking about. Most of these are just doing kind of one or two things, and they're small businesses just like I am. And if they're good, all the small builders like me around here are using them. So we're basically fighting over the same trade partners, and these guys are just, they're going as fast as they can go. They're working crazy hours, nights and weekends, just trying to keep up with the demand. But yeah, that is also out of balance.
Yeah. So a couple of things you said there, dependency, right? I'm a big fan of resilience and building resilience into processes and building resilience into systems. When you become dependent upon trades, and the divisional schedules are obviously pretty, to your point, pretty detailed in the construction industry. We've developed buildings out of the ground and we've built single family homes. So we understand divisional schedules sort of in its depth and breadth. And one of the things that Orion Growth always tried to bring to the table was that owner's perspective of, look, we get that things are very complicated, but we need to simplify them for the owner. So trying to take process and turn it into product, right? And it's messy, but you don't necessarily want to see behind the curtain. Just let us do what we want to do, what we know we can do for you in your best interest. And we've had success with it. And that's where, sort of post-COVID, meeting with you and understanding construction at a scientific level, building science and passive house construction, something that transcends just a certification is what I was in search of. Because in my commercial world, there were certifications that you could build to, but it often meant more difficult project management, more divisional schedule, harder resources to try to work through supply chain because we had to have green building type products. And we were all behind the process and the purpose of the certification. But at the end of the day, we were unsure whether we were delivering something that performed better. It was just certified. So let's talk about like offsite construction and building science. Like, let's go deep here, because I think most of our listeners are going to appreciate the depth here. How can that start to solve some of these problems of process to product and some of the trade deficits that we're seeing, some of the skilled labor deficits that we're seeing? How can we use this building science and passive house design to our advantage?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I've been trying to utilize offsite construction technologies and processes to the greatest extent possible with the current project that I'm working on in Granite Falls, but also apply that to other, whether it's custom homes or future pocket neighborhood type projects. And so far I've been focused on structural insulated panels, SIPs, as we call them, as my I'll call it an easy button to a high performance building envelope system, utilizing panels that are prefabricated in a factory in a controlled environment to, a high level of precision. Also, I think maybe more importantly, limited waste, and cost control. So I know exactly what I'm going to pay for that system up front. And that makes it easier for me to create an accurate budget that we can plan around. But by the same token, because it's being built in a factory, I also have a much better sense of when it will be delivered and when I'll be able to, put that system together on site. So it now becomes more a process of assembly versus the traditional stick-built construction where the delivery truck drops a bundle of 2x4s in the driveway and a bunch of framers, come out there like elves and start cobbling this cottage together. We're basically, my goal is to get away from that. And part of the reason is, the labor shortage that we just identified. But beyond that, it's about controlling cost and controlling quality and controlling the schedule. I feel like that's another thing that I've been, sort of frustrated by as a builder over the last few years is because the few skilled tradesmen that are, still around are in such demand. It's very hard to know when they're going to be able to show up and do the work on your site.
Yeah, time and money, right? No matter what we do, what we build, regardless of how patient the capital is, you still have the stakeholder called the owner. And the owner still wants to know when they're going to have occupancy, right? And then we have this construct of count, right? No matter when you're going to plan on delivery, unless you're speculative building, there's always Thanksgiving that they want to have in their house, or there's always a ribbon cutting they want to have at their office at the beginning of the new fiscal year. There's always something quarterly that relates to time and money. So that helps with predictability is what I heard.
For sure. And I mean, for the most part, I am a speculative builder. So in essence, I'm the owner until a buyer comes along and purchases the home. So I want to know when this thing's going to be done. But obviously buyers also want to know because it's a spec house. That doesn't mean if they've committed to buying that house, they still want to know if they're going to be in by Thanksgiving. Just because it didn't start as a custom home, it might end up finishing as sort of a semi-custom.
Yeah. And they've got a life to manage too. They've got moving, they've got to make a notification to their landlord that they're moving on, right? The world doesn't stop moving because of our construction deadline.
Well, and most of us can't afford, to own two homes at once. So we're probably going to have to sell our current home to be able to buy this new home. So timing, and scheduling is everything. So as you say, predictability and precision in that process. So yeah, I have become convinced that offsite or, what we're often describing as industrialized construction is the best way forward to achieving all those goals. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat this. I'm not here to, claim that this is going to save us a bunch of money. Because in my experience, I'm actually paying a bit of a premium right now. I'm hoping as, more builders and developers implement offsite or industrialized construction and, more manufacturers get into that business, we will see some cost reduction at some point. But I mean, for me, again, right now, the other benefits are almost more important. And because we're trying to not only build a quality product, at an affordable price, we're also aiming for a higher standard of performance. And, to your earlier point, we are seeking a certification to try to ensure that performance, but the proof's in the pudding, and every house I build, I learn things in the process, but maybe more importantly, in the feedback loop from the people who occupy that home. I live in one of the houses in my current project. We kept one for ourselves. And so my customers are also my neighbors. And so I have ample opportunity to get direct feedback on their experience, living in these homes. And there's good and bad. I mean, lots of positive feedback, but some constructive criticism that I certainly take to heart. And for me, this is a continuous improvement process. How can we continue to get better at what we're doing? And ultimately, it's about building a home that performs well for the buyer. I want them to feel like, they got a screaming deal because these houses are so much better than anything they've ever lived in before. It's really about that experience, and it goes way beyond the energy bill. We spend so much time and we put so much emphasis on trying to achieve certifications and tax credits and, utility rebates that are all based around energy savings. And those are important. Don't get me wrong. How much your utility bill has a huge impact on that affordability equation, the total cost of ownership. But there's other benefits to a high performance home that I think most buyers care way more about. And, we're talking about things like comfort. How easy is it to heat and cool your home so that you're comfortable in that space, not just from a temperature perspective, but from a humidity perspective, from a sound level? How much noise do you hear from ambient noise from the outside? So, the better the building envelope and the better the mechanical systems that we use in these homes, the better their experience tends to be. So we want to, I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the certification is great and it's a means to an end. But ultimately, what we're trying to deliver is a quality, durable, healthy, I'll throw that term out, place for people to live.
Yeah, and so much of that, so first of all, Duke Cottages is the project that Rob has in Granite Falls. I'll put that down in the show notes. Check it out. It's attainable, sustainable. Without going too far into it, it's 8 to 1,200 square feet, and it's landing in below the median average for sure. And there's so many discussions around land cost and construction cost. That happens at every conference we go to. What's your landed cost? And it's too variable, right? Like land, you don't pay for the same price of land wherever you buy. Then your horizontal costs feed into the total development cost. We won't go into that. But at the end of the day, the point is attainable and sustainable, and then healthy. And one of the things that I experienced, Rob, in my career for the last 20 years in office, was pre-VOCs. You would walk into an brand new office building with carpet and ceiling tiles and furniture from factories, and it was not clean. It smelled new. We came to that conclusion that it was new, but what that new was adhesives and probably volatile compounds. And, those are closed systems in office buildings. There's no doors and windows, so you can't crack windows. There's recirculative heat with VAV boxes and boilers. So you're breathing the same air from the floor below as you are from the floor above. Then we get into COVID, right? And you have an airborne virus. So I start looking around at these, and I've been in the system for 20 years, and I think to myself, this airborne virus travels through HVAC systems, and we have closed buildings, and we have volatile compounds, and we have VAV boxes that blow air from floor to floor. So we're sharing each other's air. And that's really what got me to a point where I wouldn't have that at home, right? Like that wouldn't be okay for me to live in. So why is it okay for me to work in? And now we're working and living sort of in the same place, right? That's why I love the mind meld of sort of where you are and your focus and your lecture on sustainability around homes, and why indoor air quality is important, and why understanding moisture content is important, and humidity and noise, all of these environmental factors that play into our well-being. We're spending more and more time home, and we're working from home. And I don't see that trend coming back. That's a long conversation that people are fighting on the commercial real estate side of mandates and coming home. At the end of the day, I think we're seeing more of multi-use activities. We're seeing more people using their homes in more unique ways. So having an environmental component, being able to speak to that, it's just revaluing the asset, right? But my house is also certified clean, so there's so many benefits to what I'm seeing as potential benefits as an entrepreneur for IOC. where you're building in a controlled environment, you're delivering, the site is prepped, your time to market is quicker. So it just changes the valuation structure more than it does anything else, right? Because there's implied value and benefit that's not currently part of the asset equation when it comes to maybe getting an estimate or getting a comp.
Yeah. So obviously the appraisal process, weighs heavily into the real estate transaction. So, and there have been some issues around getting homes to appraise that are built off site. So we'll try to be careful with our terminology to be transparent and clear. But I mean, modular construction is what, I'm moving toward, so we're building homes in a factory in modules that are easily shipped, and transported to their permanent location and then set with a crane on the foundation. And, I think a lot of times people confuse modular with manufactured, which is a built to HUD code. And, there's pros and cons to that. But I mean, modular homes are built to the same code that stick built, site built homes are built to. So they're just built in a controlled environment of a factory. So, and, that industry also has a lot of potential for continuing to evolve and be more productive. And so, in other words, I think just stick building indoors is not the ultimate answer. We need to continue to innovate and, utilize technology to help streamline that process. And you're starting to see more and more modular manufacturing facilities utilize robotics, and so automation, I guess, would be the way to say it. And so but to your point, what we're really trying to do is expedite the construction process because quite frankly, it takes too long. I would say 8 to 12 months is probably the average, that we're seeing for site built construction. Obviously some of the national builders can do it much faster than that. But the way I am trying to decrease my turn time on these is by utilizing industrialized construction so that while I'm building the foundation on site, they are building the modules in the factory. And then by the time I get my foundation done, they're ready to deliver the modules. So we're compressing that timeline, as you said.
Yeah. And in entrepreneurship, right, you're talking about mass adoption, creating additional speed or creating better time to market, which lowers the cost. We're really turning a process into a product. And if we can turn that process into the product and we can make it to a point where it's scalable, what that ends up happening is it turns into a technology which reduces it, right? The adoption curve happens. And that's really what we're pushing for. And what you and I spent some time talking about a couple of weeks ago. Let's shift gears a little bit, right? Because we have to talk about Helene and we have to talk about the tech hub for UNCI. And you, I think, are the person from ADL Ventures that I would ask that question to. So can you tell me about your role with ADL Ventures and with UNCIC, what that is, so that we can start to talk about how we can turn industrialized technology or industrialized offsite construction into a product and potentially into a technology so we can reduce costs?
Yeah. So one of my other hats is I was tapped as the regional innovation officer for the Western North Carolina Industrialized Construction Tech Hub. And this is an EDA planning grant that was landed by ADL Ventures. And they've been working on trying to secure grant funding for the Appalachian region for several years now. And all of these grant proposals have been built around offsite industrialized construction and trying to create jobs at the same time we're creating housing. So the EDA planning grant is not the only one, that ADL has secured, but they've certainly got their sights on larger grants, multi-million-dollar grants that could, completely transform the way that we build housing in Western North Carolina, specifically. But, if you're building in, a factory or multiple factories, in this region, you can also easily ship these, out of that region, so they don't just benefit Western North Carolina, they could, certainly benefit the entire Southeast, and potentially, the whole Eastern Seaboard. But yeah, um, I guess the work of the Tech Hub thus far has been to gather a consortium of stakeholders who, whether they be elected officials or city, county staff, manufacturers of offsite construction, developers, builders who are either already utilizing offsite construction or interested in implementing that into their process. You mentioned earlier the education aspect of this. So we need to train a workforce. I think the community colleges, this is hard for somebody who proudly works for Appalachian State University to admit, but I think largely the community colleges do a much better job with the type of training that is required right now than your traditional four-year universities do. And we have some really strong community colleges in this region. And when I say region, the Tech Hub is really centered in what's sometimes called the Unifour, the four-county region of Catawba, Burke, Caldwell, and Alexander counties. And we've certainly started to expand that largely as a result of the hurricane and the damage that resulted from it. And so we definitely want this to have an impact immediately, because there's an immediate need for housing as a result of that disaster.
Yeah. So bravo on taking on that work, by the way. And it's funny because, obviously we're both in North Carolina, right? My focus has been national with Orion Growth for a lot of years. We're on day 95 today, by the way. I just finished my last post on that. And just for the numbers, just to put those into the podcast, we still have 5,000 families that are living in hotels. We have about 150,000 structures that are gone. We have 285,000 acres of forestry that's gone. And the current estimate is about $50 billion, the impact of Helene on Western North Carolina. And I was interested, Hurricane Sandy that hit the Northeast, Manhattan, some of the most high value real estate in the world, was 70 billion, right? So it blew me away to sort of make those two connections, right? Like I live and play in Western North Carolina. You live and play in Western North Carolina. And there's $50 billion of damage. And, to think about that versus like Manhattan, right? The widespread destruction, I don't think people can really grasp. Our farm is in southwestern Virginia, which is up in Grayson County, which is the very top of the impact zone. But this runs all the way down to Greenville, South Carolina. It's some 600 miles long, this path of destruction. And the number of structures, not just houses, structures, farms, cows, cattle, hayfields, the economic impact that this will have transcends, sort of the numbers that we can qualify and quantify right now. And the fact that we've sort of now been given this scenario, inherited this scenario, this is up to us to solve. And this is economic development now, for sure. If we want to rebuild and build back, we have to build back something. I don't want it to sound cliche that we have to build back better, but we have to build back better. And a lot of the areas that we were functioning in before are not going to have the same environmental conditions they do now. So being able to deploy multiple housing units at a rate of speed, at a cost at which is amicable to the economic environment, that's a big problem to solve. And heretofore, 96 days ago, we were sort of working on it, but now there's a sense of urgency, right? So have we seen any additional resources? Do we know where that's going to be in terms of like Washington, D.C.? Now that, the EDC was at that meeting, right? We talked about that a little bit. USDA was at that meeting. Department of Energy was at that meeting. NREL was at that meeting. Are there any additional resources for this grant for ADL and for what you're trying to do with WNCIC and the Tech Hub that could potentially expedite some of this, some of what we're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the funding expert by any means, but what I learned in those most recent in-person meetings in Hickory was that there are definitely, appropriations, from the federal level that are heading this way. The question is, how long is it going to take those to make their way through the federal, state, and then to local level? my guess is, it's probably going to be several months, but not years, So, I mean, I do think we're going to see an impact of that, of those funds, in 25. So that starts tomorrow. So, let's get to work.
That's why you're on today, Rob. And that's why I appreciate that you took the time. Again, just like everything else that we're all doing, I know I set my professional life pre-Helene. This is what I say. COVID cracked the windshield and Helene smashed the glass for me. I'm shifting my entire focus now, post-Helene, on sort of this holistic conversation. And I don't know where my acumen and my experience from the past is going to fall to best jettison this to the next level. There's policy change that needs to happen. We need some better planning and zoning from planning and zoning, land commission, land use. You mentioned it very briefly that manufactured homes and modular homes are not the same, and that the zoning and planning around those aren't the same. I know from seeing and knowing you long enough that you've never built a house to code because you think code is minimum. And I love that about you because I think that we can always build better and it doesn't necessarily have to cost more. And I think that there's an opportunity here for us. There's an opportunity every time there's a disaster. And this is a massive disaster. So I see it as a massive opportunity for this emergence, which is the season 2, the season 2 topic of conversation at the Edge Report for emergence of new public-private partnerships and potentially some new policy making. So apart from the fact that we've got total destruction, we've got meets and bounds issues because we've got land that now is washed away. We've got structures and people that are homeless and not here. We've got urgency that we need to restore housing. Well, let's talk about the positive for a second and say, in a perfect world of utopia, like where would we start? Would it be more patient capital? Would it be better partnerships? Would it be better planning? Where in that hierarchy of need that Maslow left us with, where would we start?
Well, I guess where we chose to start, where we were advised by EDA to start with the Tech Hub was to build that consortium and that consensus around what is the need and how do we meet the need. And I think we've now been working for almost a year in these working groups out of that consortium that we built in that 4-county, well, and really even larger region than that, to identify what are some of the resources that we have in North Carolina, in the Southeast right now, offsite construction resources, or industrialized construction resources, and where are the holes, where are the gaps that we need to fill. And a lot of the factories that exist in North Carolina, in the Southeast, are at capacity already. They really can't take on any more orders. So we need more capacity. We need to build more factories. And especially as more builders and developers start to utilize industrialized construction, there's no way we're going to have enough capacity to meet that need. So I guess it goes without saying, it's expensive to put up a factory. It's not just the shell. Even if somebody gave you the land and the shell, or contributed that, as part of the partnership, it's still expensive to outfit that with all the equipment that's necessary, to do that construction in that factory. So it's resource intensive, it's capital intensive. And so, you use that term patient capital, which I love. I've not seen much of, but I love the notion of it at least. And, certainly I think we need more of that. And that capital has to also understand the benefits of offsite construction. But I can tell you from personal experience that most traditional banks, lenders, don't really grasp the workflow or I'll call it the draw schedule, that would be required for offsite or industrialized construction versus what they're accustomed to with stick.
Yeah, and I heard that loud and clear with EDC in the room too. In order for this to be a viable conversation around economic development, we have to broaden the horizons. It's not just about the project, and that's why I'm so focused on pathways, communities, and the purpose of why, and total tenancy, right? The person who is going to live in my case, the multifamily structure or the adaptive reuse that we found, needs to have some purpose, right? They need to have, in my opinion, some upward mobility, some financial acuity. So there's an opportunity for education and what we talked about earlier about taking appropriate percentage of their income and applying that towards housing. They have to have access to the upside of equity. How do you maintain that cost? You learn that from Habitat, right? Some land grants and putting the land lease in trust for 100 years helps a lot. You can still participate in the upside of equity structure, but maintain the level-headedness of the cost of living increase of the land value. And then digital equity. So many of the municipalities that I've talked to, upward mobility and digital equity are two of the biggest problems that we have in affordability. And what I'm focused on, Rob, and you know this, is my passion towards the working class, middle class people. Communities are built on first responders, and they're built on nurses, and they're built on teachers, and the health of a community. I've talked to Shay, to Bertie right there at State about the QEP, the Quality Enhancement Plan, is about building resilient communities. And we've got to find a way to stabilize housing, to stabilize the middle. And that's where, to me, I heard a resounding response in there from EDC, from USDA, from NREL, even the Department of Energy. If we have to build with purpose. And the purpose of the industrialized offsite construction factory is to build purpose, is to build mods with like modules, to build floor assemblies, it's to build structural insulated panels, is to build the parts and components and pieces that turn this into a technology. But it's not just about the construction, it's about the why. It's about returning the value to the community of attainable, sustainable housing for the middle class. I've seen it firsthand at App State. I work with you guys on as a partner in a lot of the move management processes and project management processes. And to attract and retain people like you on that mountain, it requires you to live somewhere. And post Helene now, we've actually lost them, right? So let's talk about like how you define attainable, sustainable housing, like your ICP, and like who your customer is, because I think that plays into the EDC conversation around why economic development. Why would we build a factory that can help build more factories or build more homes for people? Did I get there okay?
Yeah, I mean, so the bar that I set for myself for my construction business was that everything we build will be certified to the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home Standard. So these homes are extremely well insulated, extremely airtight, built with healthier materials, low VOC or no VOC materials. And, so basically we're putting that label, on these homes. And by the way, I guess, just to level set, the Zero Energy Ready standard also includes EPA's E-Star and Indoor Air Plus labels. So you're basically required to certify, to those standards, in addition to the Department of Energy's requirements around zero energy readiness, solar ready, electric vehicle ready, and all electric ready. So if you're not already utilizing heat pumps, for space conditioning and for water heating, you would need to at least build a home that is prepared for that. In other words, has the electrical capabilities to make that happen. And we've chosen to do that out of the gate. So everything we build is all electric. It's heat pump everything, air source heat pumps for space conditioning, heat pump water heaters, heat pump dryers, ventless condensing dryers. And we're also including induction ranges in these homes. So we're trying our best to give people a very high performance, positive experience in the home. And, I think in some ways people think they're sacrificing something, when they give up gas. And, especially people who really like to cook and think they have to have, a gas cooktop. But, induction, I feel like, is the closest that, that we can get with all electric. So we want to provide that and, bake that into what we're doing. Prioritizing the technology, but again, I think more importantly, the quality experience that they have living in that home. That, to me, that's obviously the most important thing that we can provide.
Yeah, my subject matter expert that I've been working alongside now this year, that I met at your Energy Summit last year, is Rob Leonard. And Rob refers to that as shades of green, right? Which I love that concept. It's shades of green because, and as part of my group that's part of the environmental literacy certificate program up at Oak Hill Academy, we're working on trying to create the taxonomy around this and depoliticize and demystify a lot of that information. That's why I love Rob's perspective on shades of green, because you don't have to, the building has to perform. That has to happen. The enclosure specialist, the building performance, the passive envelope, as they call it, in FIA certification, the building has to perform. Because if it doesn't, then no matter what systems you start to introduce to it, they're going to be inefficient, or they're going to have a low barrier to entry on the CapEx, on the initial buy, but then they're going to have a high maintenance cost on the long term, right? And we all know that that's a sliding scale. And that's why I love Rob's analogy on shades of green. And choosing those shades of green, if you have a seat at the table when you're programming the project, or you're asking in technology, you ask, it's event modeling, what are we trying to build? Having that conversation where it's a menu is brilliant to me, because it takes away a lot of the passion on either side of the aisle, so to speak, and sustainability. And we have to start building better, and we have to start building structures that last longer, and we have to start building buildings that are lower, are cheaper to maintain over time. So I don't think that anybody can really argue those three things. And if they do, which we'll continue to see probably a strong percentage of people do, people can continue to put up cardboard boxes that will fall down in 10 years because of their forma, but at least it'll be transparent. And I always say that's fine. It's not for me. So when you go out and you create these public-private partnerships, and you create this consortium of conversation, and you look at it through the lens of economic development, you have to start figuring out the units of measure and defining the units of measure along with value and benefit, not just internal rate of return, and not just looking at it through the lens of capitalism. And that's part of, I think, bringing it back to, President Carter, the vision of affordable housing that he had at such an early time was exactly what we just said. But through a lot of iterations, that's changed, right? And now there's almost an opportunity for us here in Western North Carolina with resources after a massive disaster, with a lens focused on us, with all of us in industrialized offsite construction, building science, entrepreneurship, and even investment banking, to come together and to build something right, to show the rest of the world that we can do it.
Yeah, I mean, just to stay on that Habitat for Humanity example for a second, I mean, I'm extremely proud of, the work of that organization and the time that I spent there. And I now serve on the board, at the affiliate in Hickory where I used to work. So, I mean, I'm still a part of that organization. But the reality is, even though Habitat is one of the perennial, top 100 builders in the country, if you think of it collectively, if you put all these small affiliates together and the number of houses that they're building every year, they're making an impact. But most affiliates are rural, and they're only building 1, 2, 3 houses a year. Those are significant. They're making a huge impact on the lives of 1, 2, or 3 families a year. But the need is so much greater than that. But Habitat can't do it alone. We need all builders to be thinking this way. I don't see us, getting to a point where, this is necessarily required of all builders or developers. But I mean, some municipalities do require that a certain percentage of the units be affordable, and you can define affordable, however you want. I mean, Habitat traditionally is serving below 80% area median income. So truly affordable. Whereas the homes that I'm building, I think of them more as workforce housing. So HUD would typically define that as 80 to 120% of area median income. But, as you pointed out earlier, if you look at what the average, person in your area is bringing home, and what, 25 to 30% of that looks like, what can they buy? And, a lot of times the answer, especially in the Boone, high country, is nothing. They can't afford to buy anything in this area. They have to live outside of the area and commute, or they're going to be renters. And, I think it seems that a lot of younger generations are choosing to rent. That is actually their preference. They're They're not necessarily ready or interested in being tied to one home, one geographic location, so, and that's okay. But you're also seeing this trend where large national builders and private equity are speculatively building single family homes for rent. That is the intent, is that they would be for rent. And, there's plenty of demand. The homes that I'm building in Granite Falls are for sale. But I get inquiries on a regular basis for people who want to rent these houses. And if I could afford to hang on to a few more of them, I would gladly rent them. I just want this to be a home for somebody. So, I don't care if they're renting it or buying it. I think in terms of, equity and trying to build wealth, certainly we would like to put them in a position where they can afford to buy. But if they're not in a position to do that for whatever reason, and, take the hurricane, and there's so many people who've been displaced, the demand for short-term or mid-term rentals, not necessarily looking for long-term. They just need a place temporarily until they can get back on their feet and figure out, where they're going. There's a huge need for that. So we need more housing in all types. And as you said earlier, we need for municipalities, planning, zoning, and even, getting into building codes to be more flexible and to be more innovative around these ideas of creating more density, allowing for smaller alternative housing types. We probably don't have time to get into the whole accessory dwelling unit, conversation, but that could be a whole nother podcast episode, so, and because these are small structures, they are ideally suited to be built in a factory, shipped out to the site, and then, placed on a permanent foundation.
I love the ADU. You're right, because the ADU conversation quickly goes to Airbnb, which goes back to rental, which goes to short-term rental, which has a higher IRR. And that's why everybody loves them. They can buy them and rent them out as a product. And it does. It takes the process and turns it into a product. And it takes the process, the product, and turns it into a technology, which reduces the cost. So it's that same notion over and over again. And it's opportunistic in terms of capital and rate of return from investment, but it doesn't account for value and benefit. And that it doesn't rebalance the balance sheet, so to speak. And I think that's what the open market is struggling to get to, right? And that's in my opinion, without going into civics and politics, that's the role of the government when the private industry can't seem to solve the problem or work it out. There's an opportunity for economic development investment to allow entrepreneurs and developers to explore more expressive units of measure and value and benefit. That's why pathways communities. Adaptive reuse is a huge part of it for me. I think the greenest building is the one that's already there. I love that what Sam Rashkin's working on down at the lab in Tennessee on, sort of this repeatable kit of parts for retrofit, because I think that's important. We have a lot of structure in this country that could be habitable. It could actually be clean and perform. We don't have the trades that are doing that because a lot of times it's easier to imagine the space by scraping all the trees off of it, starting from scratch with a blank canvas. And I think the progressive part of what you just said, Rob, is what's so important to me. As let's just say that we go to college, we get a degree, we choose to be a teacher, we're choosing at that point a career path that could potentially be sort of a career for 25 years. Right. And you're signing up for sort of 3 to 5% cost of living adjustments forever. But yet we're operating right now in an inflationary economy. Right. So just stabilizing that pathway, I'm a single person. I just graduated from college. I'm a teacher. I need 500 square feet max. Then maybe I get a partner. My life progresses and I find somebody that I want to share my life with. Now that 500 square feet is not enough. So maybe there's a 750 square foot town that has a spare bedroom so that we can work from home when the other one's not. We can have a dog that we can walk. Then maybe we decide we want to have kids. Like this all starts to sound like the American dream of the past, right? Then maybe we have 2 cottages that are all in the same community where we can start to participate in a single family home. We have our own backyard and we have a grill outside. That to me is what's so important, is that we can restore this sort of hope and this upward mobility from the process of life when we graduate from college to when we get to our first house. And we do it responsibly. Every decision that we make has financial acuity built into it. That to me sort of starts to restore hope, which sort of starts to restore the fabric of the community, right? That's how I want my teachers to be living for my future, for my grandkids. That's how I want my police to be responding in my community, or my nurses to be taking care of me. I want to know that they're comfortable too. And I don't want that to come off as soft. I want that to come off as real. Like we've always had that since I've been alive. And I think that's really our responsibility, is to restore some of that hope back into it through housing, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you think about the people who are buying my cottage homes in Granite Falls. These are smaller houses, as you pointed out earlier. They're ideally suited for 1 and 2 person households, which means my target market is really first-time home buyers on one end of the spectrum, or retirees or soon to be retired on the other end of the spectrum. And that's exactly who's buying these houses. If you've got a couple with a couple of kids and a couple of dogs, and I mean, these aren't really ideally suited for you, and that's okay. But I think you had commented on an article on LinkedIn I was reading this morning, the Urbaneer, talking about trying to provide. It's really a new twist on retirement housing. So you're not necessarily talking about a 55 plus community. We're just talking about creating housing typologies that are ideally suited for someone who's aging. So they can absolutely be smaller, but they also need to be universally designed, for aging in place. And they need to have certain, features or technologies built in that makes it safer and healthier, for those people to live successfully, independently in those spaces. When you cluster those together in a pocket neighborhood like Duke Street Cottages, now you've got this supportive community around you, so you've got literally half the people who live at Duke Street are, 20s and 30 somethings, singles or couples. And then the other half are 60s, 70s, singles or couples who can use some help sometimes. To me, that does balance, that work.
Yeah, I love that. And the age in place, we're talking about market. To me, category creation inside of commercial real estate, again, when I look at it in terms of a larger development with progressive sort of life, upward mobility, financial acuity, digital equity built into it. But to me, that's a new category, even inside of, maybe it's a subset of multifamily, but not really, right? Because it's truly a community, and you can rely on each other for a lot of things when you've got a good community of people. And working with younger people like you have now for so long, when you ask them, that's really what they want more. They don't want less of it. They want more community. So the American dream in a lot of ways, I think, has shifted. And I think that maybe the beginning and the end sort of look very similar. You start out kind of where you want something simple to maintain and you want to control your costs. And then at the end, when you're, age in place, you sort of want the same thing, right? You don't want to cut the grass anymore. You don't want to paint soffits. You don't want to clear the gutters, all the things that you do during the middle. And I think that that's a whole new category creation inside of these pathways communities, where they take into account, financial resilience. They take into account digital equity, where they give people access to information like we're doing right now. This is the future. This is the now. Imagine what digital equity will do if everybody has a gigabit Ethernet connection and we can share more information faster. And then finally, that upward mobility, where you can plan for the future instead of worrying about your grocery costs or your gas bills or your insurance costs or your gas, your oil, heating oil, fuel spiking. You can control those costs and have sort of this all-in sort of, multi-layered buy-in that we have in so many other facets of our life outside of housing. Well, Rob, we're at an hour, bud, and we could do this for days, and we will, because I think it sounds like we have a lot more to work on this year. which I'm not going to tease out too much, but WNCIC, the tech hub, is huge. The work that you're doing with ADL Ventures is amazing. ARCA Rise, we didn't even talk about the Appalachian Regional Commission. Some of the work I'm doing with Virginia Tech and the amazing things that Andrew McCoy's doing at Myers Lawson. We're working with the city of Roanoke. They have a new mayor. They're talking about some policy change. That project you're working on down in Burke County that might potentially be able to take some parts and pieces of this Pathways community and create some resilience through upward mobility. The Energy Summit at App State in June, I'm going to plug that a little bit. Maybe I'll have Mike Cap on the show, talk about what that is and see if we can bring some people into that. Thank you, man. You're out there walking the walk, talking the talk. I have no idea how you took an hour out of your time the day before New Year to talk with me about this stuff. But man, important work, excellent work, and Godspeed, my friend.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Rob. That was great, man.
That went fast.
Cool. Yeah, right.